Daf is Bava Basra Daf Mem. We're going to start on the bottom of 39b, the last line. The Daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. So it says, Amar Rav Nachman. The Rava says in the name of Rav Nachman, Mecha Bifnei Shnayim, that if a person wants to lodge a protest and say that that this is his property that the other person's on, he wants to lodge the protest, which is in advance of actually going to the court, then he has to do this in front of two. But and on top of that, he doesn't need to say to the witnesses, you have permission to write. What is this referring to? Rashbam says the witnesses can write the document of protest for the ma'arer, the one who's making the complaint, so he has it, even though he didn't command them. Meaning normally a person can only write a contract for you or something down if you ask him to do it. But here, since it's for his benefit to have it, we say, so you're allowed to do something without a person's permission if it's to his advantage. You don't even need to ask him. So you can make the macha, you have to make the macha in front of two people, but you don't need to tell them to write it. So then the Gemara says on the top of Mem Amud Aleph, Moda bifnei shnayim vein tzarich mark suva. Moda is if where you're being forced to sell or give away your property. Some say even non-property like movables. So that also needs to be done in front of two people. And there too, since it's to your advantage, so what's the modah? You're being forced to give it away. So you want to say in advance to somebody else, this property that I'm selling, I'm really actually don't want to give it. I'm only doing it under duress. I'm being coerced. So that has to be done in front of two people in advance. And there too, you don't need to tell them to write it because it's to your advantage to have that document. And Rashbam says the call of the milsa, Shkolach Moshe, Greg, here's the Gemara, take a stender Moshe. The call of the milsa, the general rule Rashbam says is anything that's for his permission, the court does not need to, he doesn't need to ask permission. Run 40, a mem amud aleph. So then hoda bifnei shnayim v'tzarich mark suvo. So, but if a person does hoda, what's hoda? Hoda is you make an admission that you owe somebody else money. In order for that to be binding, that needs to be done in front of two people. And there, it's to your detriment to have to make such an admission. Why is it to your detriment? Because if the debt is written, there's certain differences in the law. If it's a malva b'shtar versus a malva alpev, if it's a document done if it's a loan done by a document versus an oral loan. And so therefore, since it's not to your advantage for it to be written down, the witnesses need to ask first if you want them to write it down, the admission that you made. So the hodah, in order for it to be binding, has to be made in front of two people, and you would need to tell them to write it. Then kinyan bifnei shnayim. A kinyan is what we discussed this many times. This is the formal act that is necessary to make a transaction, to seal a transaction. So what we're talking about here is the kinyan chalipin, or also called the kinyan sudar, where you give, let's say, a handkerchief to the other person, he picks it up, and in exchange, you've acquired what he's trying to sell you, let's say his cow. So therefore, this action of the kinyan needs to be done in front of two people. it doesn't really need to be done in front of two people. The kinyan would be binding even if there's not two people there. The commentaries point out. Yeah. So, yeah, the Gemara discusses at length in Kedushin the details of how this works. But as a baseline, the one person is giving something to somebody else, and the other person is selling him something. So if you want to purchase this cow, you give him your handkerchief to pick up. But there's different discussion about the Gemara and Kedushin to clarify exactly who should give that object. But that's the baseline understanding. But why do you need two witnesses with respect to a kinyan? You can do a purchase without two witnesses. So he's saying no, that just in other cases, the Rashbam saying, since in other cases you require three, here there's more Gemaras over there, Meyer. So he says, so since in other cases you require three, therefore in this case, it's saying you don't require three. That's what he's saying. Meaning to say these are not witnesses. These are not witnesses to make it possible. These are not witnesses to effectuate the transaction, but they're just witnesses of a proof to the matter, so that we don't want him to contradict it. Means say you don't really need two witnesses to effectuate a deal. We just want two witnesses to be proof to the matter. But if you're the person who's purchasing it, you clearly don't need to say. You clearly don't need to. We're on 40A, Meyer. You clearly don't need to say. You don't need to say. Write it down because it's clearly to your advantage to write it down. Do you want to stender, my friend? So he says in there you don't need to tell him to write it down. So and then the last case here is kiyum shtaros. The kiyum shtaros has to be done bishlosha. What's kiyum shtaros? Kiyum shtaros, we've had this. This is most prominently discussed in the beginning of Ksubos. That this is what's called the certification of a document. That let's say you say, okay, I'm selling you. I owe you $1,000. I'm putting it down. Okay, let's make a contract. We have two witnesses, but then you're worried those two witnesses might not be around when I'm going to collect the money. So I want to get another level of assurance that this is a valid document. So you take it to a court, a recognized court, and the court will thereby certify that they know who these signatures are and this was done. And they recognize that this was the valid legal action. So that kiyum shtaros has to be done bishlosha. That you need a court of three to certify an agreement. Says the Gemara. Let's analyze these cases. Amarava ikashui. Rava says if something is indeed difficult for me, this is what's difficult for me. Hakashui. This is what's indeed difficult for me. Hi kinyan echidami. How can we actually have this kinyan? How do we view this kinyan? How do we view this transaction? If this kinyan is, what are we comparing it to? If the writing of this contract for the kinyan is considered like an action of the court, because it looks like it's a judgment, and meaning the witnesses see this kinyan, and so therefore, as a result of this, the money is going to go out from one person. And so therefore, they can write it. If that's the case, we buy a tlasa. Then we should require a court of three. But if it's not like an action of the court, then why doesn't he need to write? Why doesn't he need to tell them to write it? Because the person who's writing a contract that he's selling or getting rid of something is bad for him, because now people know he's selling off his property and he's going to get a worse credit report. So he should require to have to say ksuba. He should require to have to say to write it. So the Gemara says Basra debaye hader pashta. So but Rava, after he asked this question, he answered it. He said, well, it's not like an agency of the court, so therefore you should have to say, why do you have to say, you should have to say ksubu, why do we say that you don't need to say write it? Why do you not have to say write it? Because as a baseline, we can assume that the assumption is that when you do a kinyan, you're expecting it to be written down. Rashbam says, Mishum de'ela achar kinyan kum. After the kinyan, there's nothing. Given the makno besuda b'fnei edim, u'memar la'achno so miyad, ve'eno midacheo ad sheyelach, v'yimshol kum metalton yelach, v'yachsu b'kar kavos, miskabin hu'achno so bayin yafa, v'stam merotza sheikatzabo. He wants to give it the generous spirit, and he wants it to make it happen. He wants a deal to happen. So he doesn't mind that you write it. That's a general rule. So that's a general rule. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Rav Yosef to Amri Travayo. Now we go back to the concept of the Modah. Again, the Modah is the document that we're calling the coercion document. That you're writing this document in advance to say, listen, I don't really want to sell my property. I don't want to really sell my house to this mafia guy. I just have no choice. So you're saying in advance, I don't want anything to do with this. But says Rabbi and Rav Yosef, Damri Travaya, both of them said, Lo kasvina modah el aman delo tzayastina. He says, we only write this modah, this coercion document, for somebody who wouldn't have gone to the court if we had summoned him to the court to make this claim. Means say you can't just write it for anybody, because as a general rule, if you think this guy is forcing you to sell it, take him to court. It only works if the guy wouldn't go to court. So that's what Abai and Rabbi and Rav Yosef say. This document in the Modah, you have to be able to prove not only that you wrote this document in advance, but that you couldn't have gone to the court to stop him. To have stopped him. Gemara's response, Abai the Rabbi Damar Travayo, afilu alai v'alecha, even upon me and upon you. Meaning to say, no, that it works. The Shtar Modah works on everybody, because you don't know if there's going to be a court around. There isn't always a court available. You know, that's not always a possibility. You can't just like say I'm rushing into court anytime, day and night, waking up a judge. That's not always possible. I mean, maybe if you're in a big fancy law firm, it's possible, but for the most hardworking people, it's not a possibility. So therefore, Abai Rabbah says you could do it even upon people like me and you. You could always do this modah. Abai Rabbah says even upon me and you, somebody could write a document. Meaning even us, who we would listen to the court, you could write the shtar modah. Amri Naradai. So now we have the next case. The people from Naradai taught kol modah v'ksivda anan yadinam bey b'unsa de palanya rav modahi. Any modah, we're on top of 40b, any document of coercion where it doesn't say in it, listen, we know firsthand about the coercion going on here. If it doesn't say that, Rav Modai, it's not a document of coercion. Rav Modai. So it's not going to work. They have to know specifically. Gemara asked the question, however, what kind of modah are the people talking about that it doesn't work unless you write that we know specifically what's going on? Modah demai. What type of modah are we talking about? Ida gita udemat ude matanta. If you want to say we're talking about a get, or a bill of divorce, or a gift, and meaning to say that the husband wants to nullify the get that he's about to give to his wife, or if it's a person saying I'm being forced to give a gift to his friend. These types of coercions, there's not really need for a formal document. You just need to demonstrate what was his state of mind, and he really doesn't want to give the gift or the get. And even if the witnesses don't know exactly about the coercion going on, the giving of the get and the gift will be canceled, because we say, when do we say you need a formal document of coercion? Specifically by a sale. Then we have to be concerned that he's only selling it under duress, because he's getting the money under duress. But really, he'd much rather remain in his property. And so therefore, in order to undo the sale, he does this document of coercion. And so therefore, the witnesses can only write this because they want to get the money back because they know specifically that he's being coerced. But if somebody's just giving a divorce or gift, he's not getting money in exchange for it, and he's just revealing his state of mind, and that's enough to cancel it. And so therefore we have to say that this idea that you need to know that you need to write this specific document, that doesn't apply to a get or to a gift. The Eid is a bini, and if it's to a sale, and if you were to say that by a sale, that's when he has to write prior to doing it. He has to write this document. Rav himself said, witnesses don't write a document on a coercion document for a sale, because if the witnesses know that the person is being forced, then it's going to be canceled even without the coercion document. And if it's not a complete coercion, then it won't help. And if that's the case, what does this law mean? What does it apply? Meaning to say, where could it possibly apply? Meaning to say, it doesn't, this law of Naradai that you have to write exactly the specified case in the coercion document, it can't be referring to a case of, a get or a gift, because you don't need the full coercion document for that. You just need to demonstrate what was the state of mind. And it can't be referring to a sale, because by a sale, Rava said specifically, you just need the witnesses to know, and then you don't need a document, because if the witnesses know that it was forced, it's not a valid sale. And if the witnesses don't know it was forced, then it is a valid sale. So the Gemara says, La'olam Dizavini. No, we're talking about a sale. We're still talking about a sale, and that's what this was referring to. Moda Rava, and Rava will admit that you write this coercion document in a situation where in a situation where the seller was forced, and if he's not going to give this moda, then the witnesses won't know that he's forced, and that's where they have to be very, very clear in the document. Kamaisi the Pardisa, and like an incident with the following vineyard that we're going to be discussing. That's what Naradai said that this document house. We'll see what this specific case is. This is our old friend in Mashkanta de Surah. A guy took out, let's say, a loan of, let's say, $1,000, and in return, Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Shimon gave Reuven the use of his property for 3 years, and the property over those 3 years would basically be worth of around $1,000. So he's paying it off in that way. So he lent out, he got a land as a mashkon, as a payment for a debt for 3 years. After he ate the 3 years of chazaka, Amarei, then the lender said to the borrower, the lender is now using the borrower's land. He said, he said, look, you have a choice, buddy. If you want to sell me the property now, we could do it. I'll do a good sale. I'll give you the $50,000 for your field. If you want to sell it to me, good. But if you're not going to sell it to me, I'm just going to destroy basically this document of this note that I had on you, and then I'll prove and I'll say I had this property the whole time. It was mine. I bought it. I own it. And so therefore, in this case, you have to write a mudah. Why? Because it's not like a sale where the witnesses could come and undo it. Because in that case, the seller is being forced to sell it under duress, because they're telling him he's going. Here in this case, the seller is being forced to sell under duress because they're threatening him that he's going to lose his money entirely. And if he's not going to do this mudah, the witnesses won't be able to know that he's forced, because we're certainly not talking about a case where the lender said in front of witnesses that he's going to hide his shtar mashkanta, because if he did this, then the witnesses will be able to testify. We're talking about a case where the lender said his words to the borrower. Only the borrower knows this. And under these circumstances, the witnesses know that the borrower is being forced only because he's going to do the mudah. He's saying under these circumstances, I'm doing this action. And so therefore, he should go to the witnesses, tell them what's going on. Afterwards, he'll go to the lender with the witnesses and do the sale and get his money back. And so this is a totally different circumstance than where a person is from the beginning going to somebody to sell his property, because it's a different type of scenario, because there's no money changing hands in these cases. There's no money like directly changing hand. If he wouldn't do it with the mashkanta, he wouldn't have any money changing hands, and so therefore you can do it through a contract. It's a different type of scenario. So then the Gemara says, well, that's why this case, right? How can they say? Well, they can know that he's saying he's being coerced. And then he'll take him to they'll know that he says he's being coerced. No, it's different from the case where the guy doesn't have it as a mashkanta, because in this case, the person who has the property, he already has the property in his possession, and so therefore he would just keep it, as opposed to the other case where he's saying, I want you to sell the property to me. And so therefore, in that case where he's saying he wants you to sell the property, there they need to have direct evidence, because the property is being transferred from one position to another. That's the difference between the cases. So so then the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Hi matanta tamirta lo magbinin ba. This is a gift document that was written in secret. You can't use it to collect from. You can't use it to collect the gift. It means, say, Reuven says to Shimon, I'm going to give you my house, but I'm giving it to you secretly. I don't want anybody else to know about it, because the reason why it can't be used to collect the money, because we have to be concerned that maybe it's being written secretly because it was already given to somebody else, or maybe because he's just writing it under, he's writing it in order to cancel, like, another document that another person has to sell the house to, so he wants to do it in advance. So therefore, if it's a document that was a gift document in secret, we can't use it to collect. So the Gemara says, Hechi dami matanta tamirta. What's an example of this? Matanta tamirta. What's an example of this? Gemara explains, an example of it is Amar Rav Yosef to Amar Lula Sahadi Zilu Itamuru V'Kisrulai. Or you say the witness is the one who's giving the gift, says the witnesses go on hide and write this document. So that's pretty much clearly a secretive document, and it doesn't count. Or alternatively, Amar Rav Yosef to Amar, where he didn't say Titvu b'shuka b'baraisa v'tachtavuah. He didn't say specifically, go sit down and do this in the marketplace and write it. It means, say, one position is you have to say specifically hide when you do it in order for it to be a secret document, which we cancel. The other position is, he says, no, as long as he doesn't say specifically sit in the marketplace, then it's not going to be valid. Well, let's say he just gives it to him, and he does it and he doesn't tell him to write it in public. Is that he tells the witnesses to write it, and he doesn't tell them to hide themselves, but he also doesn't tell them to write it in public. So under these circumstances, according to the first approach, it's a valid. According to the second approach, it's not valid. Amar Rava, so Rava says this gift document that he gave in secret, it doesn't work as a gift document, but it does work as a shtar v'avya modal chaverta. It does work to cancel out a sale that you made to somebody else. So it works like a coercion document, meaning, say that if Reuven's forcing Shimon to sell his house, but Shimon quickly goes and gives it as a gift to Levi, Shimon gets out. It's not going to count as a gift to Levi because it's a secret document, but it does prove that Shimon doesn't really want to sell his house to Ruvain, that it was being done under duress. Amar Papa had Rava, this ruling of Rava that the shtar matanta, that the shtar tamirta, the secret gift document, works as a mudah, even though it doesn't work as a document, as a gift. Rava Ferishit Mar El Mikolit Mar. Rava, you had a question, Greg? Doesn't work as Rava didn't say this explicitly, but we imply it from the following story. This is a Geschmack story. We'll hear this story. So the story is as follows. A man was going to marry a woman. He wanted to betroth her. Amroe, she said to him, the woman says to the man, listen, if you're going to write to me all your money, you're going to give me all your property. If you give to me a document that you're giving me all your assets, then I find the love. I find true love in that. If you give me all your documents, okay, we're in love, and I'll marry you. But if you're not going to give me all your documents, then you and I, we got nothing to talk about. So the man's like, yeah, that works for me. He went and he wrote all the documents to this woman. Asa Bere Kashisha. So the elder son of the man comes to his Abba and he says, Amarwe, Gabra Mataviale. He says, what about me? The son is like, I've been your son my whole life. And now you're gonna give it all away to this new woman? That doesn't make sense to me. I don't like that. So the son is objecting. Father can't say no to his son. Amru Vesahade, so he says to the witnesses, Zilu itamuru ba'aver yamina v'kisvula. He says, go to this place called Aver Yamina. It's a place a little south of the Euphrates, and write a document for my son that you're giving everything to him, and do this before I'm going to give the assets to my future wife. Also, Kame de Rava. So now, after he did this, both of them come to Rava and both won all the money. So they came to both the son and the wife. Sounds like a very happy Pesach Seder. So he came to Rava, Amaru, Omar Kana, Omar Kana. So Rava says, neither one gets it. So he says neither one gets it. So the one who sees this is assuming that the son doesn't get it because it's a secret gift document. Secret gift documents don't work. But the wife doesn't get it because even though it doesn't work as a secret gift document, it works as a shtar modah, as a coerced document to prove that the later contract was forced and it was not valid. So the Chazah Savar, the one who saw this, saw it, Mishum Dehavi Modah. You had a question, Harold? Yeah.
I was just thinking if the wedding, the marriage is conditional, it's transferred.
Okay, so that's a great question, which is, let me finish this and we'll go back to that because that's a separate question. Are they going to be married? And the commentaries will discuss different opinions about why the marriage would take place, meaning to say that she didn't specify that it was conditional. Right? But that's a very much discussed question on this is the marriage valid? And presumably the marriage would be valid only because she didn't make the marriage conditional to this. It was like a separate agreement. Yeah.
So this is coercion. He's voluntarily trying to marry. He wants to marry her. He's agreeing to conditions. That's not coercion. Obviously, you have to marry.
Coercion. Well, I guess the coercion means that you're entering into this unwillingly. You don't really want to do it. Yeah.
Like someone put a gun to his head that do this, or I'm going to shoot you. Take your property or the other situation.
Yeah.
You say, okay,
This is what the Yad Ramah says. So Jeff was bothered by the point that the Yad Ramah is bothered by. He says, well, why is this a coercion? Uh, uh, so the Yad Ramah writes that the coercion is that he has such an overwhelming desire for this woman. And he, okay. So Ma the Chaza, the one who sees this whole interaction.
No marriage would ever be married.
I don't know about that. Ma the Chaza Safar Mishum Dahavya Modal Chaverta. The one who sees it assumed that the reason why the gift to the woman was not valid is because he had already done a modah. He had already done a document of coercion to somebody else. So therefore, since he had already done this document of coercion to somebody else, it's not valid. Velohi, and that's not the case. That wasn't Rava's logic. The logic of Rava is different. Really, Rava is of the position that this hidden gift document is useless. But Hasam in this case, where he writes all of his gifts to his son, it's proof that he was being forced to write it. But in this case, of what's the difference? But in this case, then in general, meaning to say when you write a gift in secret, the first document is not necessarily proof of coercion. He wants one person to get it, the other one he doesn't. It's not necessarily coercion. But in the case of the wife, it was coercion. Why is it coercion, Jeff's asking? We have the Yad Ramah's answer. So now the Gemara says, well, Ibayalahu. So the Gemara says, we're asked the question because we had said, Dama Mai, what would be the case where we're on top of 41a? What would be the case where a person says to witnesses, without specifying, write a gift to this person, but he doesn't say to write in secret, and he doesn't say to write it in public. So basically, we're asking, what's the halacha in the case? How do we pass it? So Ravina Amar Shina and Rava says, Ravina says, we're not concerned about it. And so if he didn't say anything to write it specifically in secret, it's a valid document, a valid gift document. Ravashi says, Chashina, no, if he doesn't say write it in public, if you don't say I'm giving you my house, but I want you to write it, go to the lawyer, write it down, make it public, then we are concerned that it's a hidden gift document. It's no good. You have to, if you're going to give a gift, you have to do it in public with everybody writing on it, or else it's not going to be valid. Okay, that's today's Daf Yomi. If anybody has any questions about this beautiful Daf, happy to address it. I want to say that tonight, God willing, to the Daf